Well, hello, Sublation Media viewers, Sublation Magazine readers. It is I, Douglas Lain, novelist of Bash Revolution and CEO, I guess, of Sublation Media. I'm not sure if that's actually my official title. It is August 28th, 2023, and next to me here is Ashley Frawley. You say your name now, Ashley.
Yes, wasn't sure. Am I going to say my name? So I'm Dr. Ashley Frawley. I'm Associate Professor of Criminology, Sociology, and Social Policy at Swansea University and provocateur. And
Right. And
Doug wanted to talk about a song today. No,
yeah, we're
much more interesting than that.
well, no, we're going to be talking about Oliver Anthony's song. What is it called? Richmond, north of Richmond, which has been viral for a couple of weeks. We're always a little bit late to the party
I
here,
like to
but
say we have the last word.
we have
We
the
give it
last
some
word.
thought. And we're
Yeah, that's
thoughtful
right.
types. We're thoughtful
Right.
types.
But uh, but yeah, I wanted to talk about what that song and its virality might mean, and put that into the context of what's being called a realignment of American politics, the way in which the working class vote is being contested by the conservative parties around the world, and certainly by the Republicans in the United States. This is coming after our trip to New York, where we saw Sohrab Ahmari and Bhaskar Sankara speak, and sort of, I
Rub
would say that,
shoulders with the New York literati. That's the
yeah, yeah, I would say
highlight
they
of
were,
my existence. Oh,
yeah, it
little
was,
girl from Sudbury, backwater nowhere in New York with all of these important people. That's what I was thinking. I'm such a
yeah.
geek.
Well, I met Gord there, so that was the important person I met.
I met
Gord.
Gord McGill, and I learned that we might be distant cousins.
So
He's also well, he's got family in Sudbury. Anyway, I keep interrupting you. Say
the,
important things, Doug.
no, it's fine. The Gord was the organizer, one of the leaders of the trucker convoy. That's And he was wearing a cowboy hat. If somehow I think he was wearing a leopard skin cowboy hat, but that's not correct. But somehow leopard skin was involved. He was definitely looking good at the Sarab
It was such a
Bhaskar
trip
event.
to meet him. It was just so great. He's so down to earth. Like we were walking to the book launch and he was like, "I heard there's going to be free drinks." I was like, "Yes, typically there are free drinks at this sort of thing." Like that was like the highlight. He was like, he could not believe that there were going to be free
Yeah,
drinks.
no,
I thought
that
that
was.
it
I
was
took
really,
advantage of that.
yeah, we all did. I was not feeling great the next day. Anyway,
Mhm.
so yeah, it was a lot of fun. We met a lot of interesting people, and also Gord and I met the next day, and we recorded a podcast. So watch out for that on my channel at Ashley A Frawley on YouTube. You can follow me on TikTok too if you like. I put up a video of my dog today, but I usually put up more interesting things than that. And I also wanted to shout out to my dad, who I learned watches these streams and who I am super grateful to for everything that he's given me, including a love of knowledge. So shout out to my dad. Sorry, go on.
Hello, Ashley's dad. Yeah. So if someone asks, important people, do communists want to hobnob with elites? And I would just say, well,
Yes, we should all be champagne socialists. And if you have the opportunity to make a change and a difference anywhere, to influence, get your ideas out there, I think why wouldn't you take them? Because you care more about moral purity. When people say stuff like this, it really bothers me. Like people will say, "Oh wow, you go on GB News." If you refuse to go on some media channel because you feel like, oh, that's going to tarnish you, what you're saying is you don't care about the issues you claim to care about. You care about how you look, you care about your own reputation, you care about your online persona, whatever it is. Just if you care about the issues, if you care about talking to people, you're going to go anywhere where anyone might listen. That's always been my motto. I say yes to pretty much everything. It's got me in trouble a couple of times, because if I have the opportunity to make a difference, I'm always going to do that. If I have the opportunity to talk to people, to convince people, I believe my ideas should be strong enough to convince anybody. Anyway, sorry, off my
No,
pedestal or whatever.
I'm gonna, as the more egocentric of the two of us, I say I like to be invited to these kinds of events, and to manage to piss someone off along the way while I'm at these events. My goal in life is to be important enough myself that they have to keep inviting me, even though I piss everyone off.
Yeah. Oh God, we have to encapsulation there.
Yeah, God damn it, Doug Lain's here again, but we have to bring him along. But on that note, I said hello to Vivek Chibber and Bhaskar Sankara at the end of the event, and it was an interesting event altogether. And we're going to get to Oliver Anthony in just a second, but the question was who or which party in the United States is going to be the party of the working class. And Sohrab Ahmari would like it to be the Republicans. And Bhaskar, I think, would like it to be some faction within the Democratic Party that takes over the Democratic Party. In fact, both of them would like some faction within their respective parties to take hold of the party and make it and transform it into a working class party. But when I talked to Bhaskar at the end, I asked him, so is this a handing off of the torch from the DSA left to the Social Democratic right? And his response was, no, Sohrab doesn't have a movement behind him, which I think is another way of saying that I don't know, either that the working class voters that vote for Republicans are not organized into a movement. They don't have a political movement that they're a part of, but it's a kind of a reactionary vote, or it's saying there's not enough political capital within the party itself to generate an internal, like, elite movement. I'm not sure which he meant. Maybe I'll get a chance to interview him and ask. But it does seem to me that the Republicans themselves are unsure about how to champion the working class. And that may have something to do with how the working class is defined in America, how it's thought of politically. And we can get to that. But let's talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about Oliver Anthony's song.
Well, I wanted to say too that there's a similar issue at stake in the UK, obviously, right? That the huge question is, who represents the working class? And Labour under Starmer has made this move toward saying, well, Starmer said recently, in the past, Labour was afraid to use the language of class, and we're not going to be afraid anymore. And they bring in this idea of, like, we're going to smash the class ceiling, which is interesting because that's an import of an identity politics metaphor into class politics. Obviously it has to do with gender, back when gender meant women. And he's just replaced that with class, which tells you that he sees class as this kind of identity category. But at the same time, the Tories have, having basically smashed they never would have done before. Now, having got Brexit done, it's very much unlikely that will continue. But at the same time, there's a huge fear of what will happen under a Labour government. Can we really trust this government? There's a lot of distrust going both ways. Anyways, I'll get into it a bit later. But that's a big question as well. I think people probably won't turn up, and that's great for Labour. They turn up at the next election, that is. But yeah, there's this enormous gaping. This is a major theme that we talk about a lot on Sublation Media. There's this huge gaping hole in politics, this politics of the void. And elites are happy to govern it, but they're not able to anymore. The rise of populism has told us that they can no longer happily govern the politics of the void via apathy. People just don't care, and you have your democracy of interest groups, and people just lobby the government for whatever they want. That's democracy. Carry on. No, people want a voice, but who's going to give them a voice?
Yeah, so to move from that into the song, I'm just going to quote a couple of lines from Richmond, north of Richmond. And by the way, this is the way this has been taken up, as far as I can tell, is that in the mainstream media is that this is a right-wing song, or the Republicans have tried to claim it as their own. And apparently it was played at the first Republican debate. And so here are some of the lyrics from the song. Living in the new world with an old soul, these rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just want to have total control. Want to know what you think, want to know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. Because your dollar ain't shit and it's taxed to no end because of Richmond north of Richmond. So those are just a few of the lyrics from the song. It's a pretty good song. The tune's nice. You can hum along to it. He has a good enough voice. And the reason why I think this has been considered to be a right-wing song, even though the artist himself says he's not aligned with either the right or the left, but has centrist politics, which we all know. If we're rabid radical leftist means that you're right wing when you say you're centrist. But beyond that, the reason why it's been taken up by the Republicans is because of its implicit, maybe even unconscious critique of the bureaucracy, the bureaucratic state. And I think that is what we should think about when we think about this moment of the so-called realignment as well. So the to turn against the bureaucratic state right now is also in America to turn against organized labor, and which puts you in a kind of a bind, because there is an element of the bureaucratic state which is representing labor, unionized labor, and it's difficult to accept that you would turn against that if you're hoping to build a working class political movement. So just like you wouldn't want to turn against the welfare state overall if your aim is to help the disenfranchised and the working class develop a political movement either, because you don't want to immiserate people along the way. So the same thing's true here. When you're turning against the labor bureaucracy, you are turning against whatever remains of a working class politics in America. But nonetheless, that working class politics in America, at the very least, should be criticized. And the fact that it is in disarray is why, just as much as the fact that the political parties are in disarray, the fact that the labor movement is in disarray, I think, is why there is a realignment happening. So
yeah, I mean, on the question of unions, you have to think, people are looking for some shreds of workers' power, so they look to the unions. But while there are obviously a number of great unions, the trade union movement, or unions generally, have been utterly captured by neoliberalism, by health and safety, all of this stuff. Doug, why are you laughing? I'm not saying anything funny.
I'm sorry, I'm looking over at the comments. I'll listen to you, Ashley, and I'll not look at the comments.
Well, there's a very good comment here about the line in the song about welfare workers. So, well, God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. Young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground because all this damn country does is keep kicking them down. And someone says, well, isn't that pitting workers against each other? Well, okay, yes, there are a lot of people who use welfare payments to top up their shit wages. That's a huge thing. But the idea that I think this is part of the problem and part of the issue that Labour has in the UK, where for a really long time supporting the working class meant welfare. And he says, "Oh, we're going to make work pay," that sort of thing, which says that he's starting to get a different kind of message. But you don't. Yes, we need a strong welfare net, but that is not something that gives people meaning. That is not a source of power. That is the worst case scenario. And the fact that so many people, they're calling it like the Great Resignation and that sort of thing. People find themselves there due to, all against their best efforts. People opt out and find themselves there. In fact, when we talked about this before on our Patreon, a lot of people said, I'm one of the people that opted out. And it's totally understandable why you would do that. But there isn't any kind of pride in that. And that's not kind of a pathway forward. And for too long, I think any kind of mainstream political attempt to speak to the working class has been through the welfare system. Oh, we're going to have a better welfare safety net. Look, that's people's worst case scenario. That's not life. What people want is, you go back to like 1930s and look at what, statements by, the working class at that time who had been organized in various movements. They were saying what the labor movement has given me is recognition, is a certain amount of power, and an understanding that I make history. Is that an understanding we have now? No. I mean, look at the Tories in the UK. They're like baffled that working class people have voted for them, and they're like, oh, you can see the way that they, through their policies, you can see the way that they picture the people who voted for them. Like, oh, they're a bunch of frothing in the mouth fucking racists. So I'm going to be as evil as possible to migrants because that's why they voted for me, right? Because this whole Brexit thing, it's really about immigrants. They just don't like immigrants. So they're like trying to compete to be as nasty as possible to immigrants. Look, wanting to have control over my immigration does not mean that people want like migrants thrown into the channel. That, they want control over numbers. They want to control over who it is that comes in. And control over numbers doesn't necessarily mean taking it down to zero. They want to know who it is that's coming into the country, that sort of thing. But instead they're like, oh, it's because they hate migrants, right? So they're like talking about tagging migrants. That was in the news. That was the big headlines today in the UK. We're going to electronically tag people who come into this country illegally. A lot of them are asylum seekers and so on. Huge numbers of them claim to be asylum seekers. That's kind of part of the debate, is how much is legitimate. Because they're going to like electronically tag them and this sort of thing. They were trying to put them on a barge that turned out that there was Legionnaire's disease in the water. They're trying to do all the most inhumane symbolic gestures to show, oh, we're tough on migration. So the Tories see the working class as, a bunch of stupid racists. But then, you look at the at labor, and they see the working class as an identity group. They struggle to shake off the dead weight of seeing the working class as a charity case, having this sort of paternalistic outlook. But nobody is capable of producing what made those workers from the 1930s say, we're the future. There's none of that.
Yeah. I want to address something from the comments. I know I'm being a sinner here by looking at them at all, but Corn says, I can already tell people are fishy when they whine about taxes, not inequality. And I think this is similar to the point you were raising about how working class people can be concerned about immigration without being racist necessarily or wanting bad things for immigrants. In the United States, workers complain about being taxed, even if they end up at the end of the year not owing much or any taxes. They'll still complain about being taxed because there's an income tax in the United States. And when you, I remember when I got my first job and I was told, it's $10 an hour. I was so excited. I was going to make real money, I thought. And then I got my first paycheck and it was significantly less than what I had calculated that I would be receiving. Why? Because they had taken out Social Security and income tax from my check. So I did feel that I was being taxed to death, even though I was making very little money, really. Actually, I think it was less than $10. It's like probably $9 an hour or something like that. And even that's probably inflated. But the point is that you can be thoroughly working class and be concerned about income tax and being and even Social Security, because if you're a young worker, you're not seeing that right away, and it just feels like something being taken away from you. So I wanted to point that out.
And of course, like that can become an issue. So hold that question. That can become an issue as well when obviously there's something else that's taken from you, that you work a certain amount of time for a wage that reproduces the cost of you, right? And then you continue working above and beyond that in order for your boss or a boss above him or some people very far, far away to sit on a yacht all day. You don't see that bit, right? But you definitely do see the bit that comes out in your taxes. So there is a certain amount of, everything being turned upside down on you. But that's the most obvious thing, and it works wonderfully for ideological purposes, right? That you see it right in front of you being taken out. I wonder, it would be great if we could like calculate exactly what your surplus value production was for the day and be like, oh, look, here's what you worked in order to pay your wages, and then you continued working. Here's the surplus value that was taken off your paycheck. Enjoy. I think that would perhaps engender certain even more anger, because the number would probably be considerably higher depending on the productivity of your company or your labor or whatever it might be on average.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that would, given that you can never really collect the full value of your work in this system, that would shut the whole system down. And because it's sort of an abstract, you know, you sign a contract to get paid a certain wage. So, and then for the fact that some of that wage is going to taxes right away before you even get a hold of it, that feels like an infringement more than the kind of natural working of the system as it is, I think. But yeah, go ahead.
I've just thrown a comment up on the screen here. Work isn't just about money. I think that's a really great point. And that's what I was trying to get at before with when I was saying that, you know, the working class of the 1930s was talking about how they had a sense of pride, and they recognized that the working class movement of that time had made them realize, or helped them to realize, their central place in the making of history and the making of the world. And I interviewed Lisa McKenzie a few weeks back on my own channel. And she said the same thing, that she grew up very proud to be working class, that her parents had taught her that, you know, we are the ones who make everything in this country. And she was surprised when she came out of that. You know, she never met anybody else who wasn't from where she was from. And then she found herself in like a very posh university. And she was shocked to find that other people didn't see it that way. And I think that kind of pride that comes from work is something that we are massively, massively losing, because work has become, well, work under capitalism is alienating and so on. And yet it is the thing that makes us human. And I think part of what a labor movement can do is that it kind of end having meaningful work, and movements for meaningful work can do is they kind of connect us to, you know, our species being, or whatever, our creativity, our ability to work on the world and to remake and refashion the world and to make the world, and to have a sense of pride that comes from that. And I think something that troubles me a little bit about what are otherwise quite important movements, you know, around anti-work, this sort of thing, or UBI, is I kind of see us falling into an acceptance of that alienation as characteristic of work. You know, where Marx says that the worst thing about one of the worst things about capitalism is that when we are working, we don't feel ourselves. We feel ourselves only when we are not working, which is, you know, that's terrible. That you only feel your true self when you're sitting on your ass being an animal instead of being a human being, being, you know, working, you know, using your hands, using your mind to create the world and to create the future. And, you know, this becomes a problem. And I have a sneaking suspicion, everyone's going to hate me for this, but a part of the UBI, a little part of the movement for UBI and its fashionable nature online, is this alienation from work and acceptance of alienation from work that is just never going to be meaningful, and I just want to opt out of it, combined with a kind of infantilization of culture where we just don't want to ever grow up. And it's like, just give me my allowance and shut the door to my room, mom. Like, I want the state to take care of me. I want to be a baby. I want to be an adolescent forever. I think that this is not a progressive movement for politics. I know that there are progressive elements to UBI. I know that there is a kind of rational kernel in that we're trying to bridge this void, this impasse toward in a future where, you know, necessary labor is such a small amount of our day. But I think there's also an aspect of it that is, as I have described it. Go ahead, hate me in the comments.
I'm going to give you some trouble right now.
Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Back in the 90s, back in the good old days, back in the 90s, I'll tell you a little anecdote. Well, I was the editor of the Vanguard newspaper at Portland State University. I was the opinion editor. I was not the editor of the whole newspaper, but the opinion section editor. And I wrote a column every week called What's Left, where I bemoaned the lack of a left back in 1994, 95. And one week I wanted to run a piece by a writer named Bob Black called The Abolition of Work instead of my own column. But there was a mix-up in the production process, and my column's headline and name was attached to the article rather than Bob Black's. So the most popular column I ever published was plagiarized from Bob Black. It was The Abolition of Work. And I had to, issue an apology the next week for having accidentally ripped it off. But it starts with no one should ever work. Work is the source of nearly all the misery in the world. Almost any evil you'd care to name comes from working or from living in a world designed for work. In order to stop suffering, we have to stop working. This is, and goes on from there to suggest that we should have a new life based on play, a ludic revolution. So the play, if play replaces work, then work is no longer drudgery. It's no longer work under the power of a boss. It's never hierarchical or authoritarian. And so I think that there's a movement now amongst Zoomers like to abolish work and to reject work and to escape from work.
Yeah, kids, they want to play all day. Like, that's not a realistic fucking revolution. I'm sorry. Okay, all right, look, maybe in the far future, yes, play and work will be indistinguishable, but there will always be the realm of necessity, however small it might be. There will always be a certain amount of drudgery that will be required. Even Marx says this. Marx says this in Capital Volume 2. The realm of necessity, which is getting very, very small, will nonetheless always be with us. I don't mind doing a certain amount of drudgery. I do it all the time. I am a mother. But of course, this is a kind of wonderful drudgery that also gives your life meaning, because it is, we can be makers and we can be keepers. And, some of us will have to be keepers some of the time. And, we might not like that. But yeah, okay, maybe in the far future, that's what it will be. But moving toward that, long before a world of fully automated luxury communism, we still have to work on the world. We still have to create. We still have to do things we don't want to do. We still have, like, a huge part of work, a huge part of life is just doing things you don't want to do. Like, that's why socialization is often brutal, because you have to force people to do shit they don't want to do. Like, that's living in society. You always have to subordinate your own desires and wants and whatever to other people. And it makes it even more difficult because our work is alienated and so on. And so we think that laziness is the natural tendency toward human beings, toward which human beings kind of go. They said the same thing about slaves, right? They were like, oh, slaves' natural tendency is toward laziness, because, like, who the hell wants to work as a slave, right? But I imagine in a future of kind of liberated labor that, work will be less. There will be significantly less drudgery, but there will still be a good portion of doing we won't want to do.
Well, I would just say, rather than emphasize to these kids who want to escape from work that work will always be with us and grow up, and there will always be some drudgery, and and listen to me, a mother, and by the way, your own mother took care of you and you were a lazy sod as you grew up. Rather than saying all those things.
Look, the left needed a daddy. Look, everybody needed the left. No, the right needed a daddy. They got it in Jordan Peterson. The left needs a mommy, and they can get it in me.
Oh my God! The last thing the left needs is a mommy.
No, they want it. They want it. They want the kind. Mommy.
No, they may want it, but they do not need it.
They want the old. No, sorry, the new. Non-authoritative mommy that says, well, do you think that you should go see your grandmother? But what they really need is the old-fashioned authoritative mommy who says, you'll fucking do it, okay? All right, maybe in 5 minutes, but you'll do it.
They need, okay, well, I don't want to debate.
Work. You will work. You might enjoy it somewhat, but you will still have to work. God damn it, grow up.
All right. I just want to say that the transformation of work into something that is into socialism, socialist work, I think wouldn't necessarily mean replacing work with play precisely, but it would mean that work would not be the source of anxiety and alienation that it is now. And that's what these kids are wanting in their life, is a way to feel like they can be productive without feeling like they're having to submit. And so I don't think it's deeply antisocial, this anti-work movement. But it needs to be.
Look, I did hedge my bets when I said at the beginning, I recognize that there are powerful, rational kernels in this, but I think a part of it is a certain amount of infantilization. And I can go on about why I think it's infantilization. Like, I'm sorry, Sophie Lewis, I know you're an easy target, but, if you read Sophie Lewis's work, like around abolish the family and that sort of thing, you really do get this idea that she wants to remain a child forever, and that growing up and having your own children means you have to take on responsibility. And also, of course, like, she takes fully, and I think a lot of people take on fully, this whole intensive parenting is just what parenting is supposed to be, and they don't realize it. You don't have to do that, just enough parenting is good enough. Like, people raise their kids in all sorts of different ways all around the world, and we all become functioning, most of us become functioning citizens, as long as you don't hit them. What is it? We always say, hit them in the head with a frying pan. Don't hit them over the head with a frying pan, or lock them in a closet. They'll probably be all right. Good enough parenting is fine. But she's kind of like imbibed this necessity of intensive parenting and doesn't really question it. And the whole like problematization of parenting, she just takes that at face value, like that parenting is the root of a lot of social problems that gets harped on and on and on about. But you get this sense like people just like don't want to grow up because you do have to leave your childhood behind when you become a parent. And when your own parents pass away, then you have to come to grips with the fact that you are growing up and you are a grown up, and you have to take responsibility for your actions. Who the fuck?
All right. Okay. Hey, listen, I want to throw this comment on the screen. The left.
And sorry, I wanted to say, take responsibility for your actions, and as workers, take responsibility for the future. We love being victims because it means that we don't have to take responsibility, right? Somebody over there is always hurting us. But if you want to take power and you want to move into a better world, you have to take responsibility for the fact that it could all go to shit. And in the past, it has all gone to shit. That's scary. That's scary. Better that we become sort of infantilized victims and ask for things instead. Sorry, go on. Throw the comment.
All right. Well, that's a good segue into this, actually. So this guy, Wayne Tables, is that his real name? It says, the left smug dismissal of this guy is a perfect demonstration of why I hate all of you. I have the same reaction to the welfare line, but it's one fucking line. We agree on so much. Unite, don't divide. All right. So like, I want to just clarify. We're not talking about Oliver Anthony's song in order to hate on him or on the song.
No, what? No, I like the song. I'm confused.
Yeah, but and I do think that the fact that the welfare state is critiqued in this song is something that the left, rather than using this as an excuse to reject it, should take up. I was thinking like earlier this morning about why is it that this particular song, which is in many ways a pretty standard lament against the inequalities in society, the one that you could find in 100 different left-wing folk songs from the past, has gone viral, and I think it's precisely because of those kinds of lines in it, precisely because it does not sound like a new left folk song, but is politically ambiguous. And then I find out that Billy Bragg has created a response to it, in conversation with it, where he has created a pro-union song to respond to Richmond, north of Richmond. I haven't heard it. I'll have to check that out after the stream today. But I think that simply embracing unionism or the labor movement uncritically as a way to kind of defend against this song would be a mistake. Not to say that we shouldn't try to strengthen labor unions, but something's going on in the labor movement, and I want to use this as a way to kind of segue into some actual political conversation and about American realignment, and why it is that the labor establishment is very happy with Joe Biden, and yet the Democratic Party's hold on the working class is being contested at the same time. So you can have people like Bhaskar and even more so Bernie Sanders champion Biden as a great representative of labor and as probably the most pro-labor Democrat we've seen in decades, and it be true, and it actually be true, and yet that won't necessarily compel loyalty from unionized workers, let alone the vast majority of working class people. And so why is that? And so you start to look at what is being touted as great victories for labor under Biden, and to a large extent, the victories have been for the labor bureaucracy itself more than for workers. So, like, Biden has promised to give union organizers a seat at the table as the administration plans to reindustrialize America through some act like the Competition with China Act or something like that. And he's been vocally supporting unions and the right to unionize, and even trying to use the rules within the labor bureaucracy to enact some parts of what's called the ProAct. So to avoid having to actually bring it to a vote and pass it into law, there's these like attempts to attach bits of it to other legislation, and also to use rules within the labor bureaucracy to enact some of the ProAct, often through just enforcement, increasing enforcement. So selecting the right people who would be likely to enforce existing labor laws is one of the things that Biden has done. These are all not bad things. And the ProAct is something I support and would like to see get passed, but it's a watered down version of what Obama promised to pass when he was running in 2008, which was a card check rule so that you could more easily unionize without going to a secret ballot. Now that's being done through the ProAct, if at all, by creating rules which would make it easier to root out corruption in the electoral process and overturn election results if it's found that the employer intervened. So, and then that the idea is that might then mean reverting to a card check approach to enacting a union and instantiating a union. So there are a variety of things in the ProAct that are worthwhile, which it would expand who has to pay dues. It would protect workers from having to attend meetings by the boss, which are anti-union, and so the bosses couldn't have a captured audience. And it would make it easier to root out corruption in the electoral process in bringing in unions. It doesn't seem likely that the ProAct is going to pass, even though it did get through the Congress and through a Senate committee, but whether or not it will actually even come to a vote, I can't say at the moment. But overall, what I'd say about Biden's pro-labor politics is that it has been a pro-labor politics that mostly focuses on empowering the labor bureaucracy, using the enforcement of rules and the expansion of labor rules, rather than even something more directly democratic like passing actual legislation. And certainly there has not been a directly politicized labor movement under Biden. And in fact, before the ProAct has even passed, the AFL-CIO has already endorsed Biden and Kamala Harris for re-election in 2024. So they're certainly not the AFL-CIO is not trying to leverage its power there. And then I have some things to say about the Republican side of this as well. But that's what I would say is happening, that there's a disconnect between the way the left, and especially the labor left, conceives of the Biden administration and what it means to have a powerful labor movement, and the way everyday workers and even unionized workers conceive of what political power would mean. So that.
Well, as you were speaking, somebody said, which you made good points, all of which I agree with. But somebody said the song went off the rails when the lyrics shit on poor people on assistance. And I wonder, why do you think we have that? Why do we find it easier to feel an affinity with poor people on assistance than, say, a trucker or like the person who might be sort of stereotypically kind of a blue collar worker? Why do we feel why is it so much easier for the left to say, no, 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 these are the ones, than it is to kind of see eye to eye with somebody, maybe in the south of the United States?
Well, I'm not sure if it's really true overall in the general population, but on the left, well, we can, there are all sorts of identity politics reasons why it would be easier to identify with someone who was precisely 5'3" and 300 pounds and living on welfare and might have a mental disorder and can't work and so forth, rather than 6'2" muscular trucker who is struggling to not be vaccinated. I mean, it just seems for culture that the cultural assumptions behind that are pretty obvious. But on the left, we like our victims to be victims rather than political agents. But the question for me is, why is it that an anti-elite, pro-working class song has to can only critique the welfare state by critiquing welfare recipients? Why is it? And I'm not even critiquing Oliver Anthony here. I think that is the way it can be expressed so that it captures the popular imagination right now, and has been since the Reagan era, the way that can be expressed and capture the popular imagination. And look, working class people really despise other working class people who don't work and who go on the dole. And if you're going to work every day for a shitty wage and getting your income taxes cutting into your wage, and you're struggling, and you have a cousin or a brother-in-law or just a friend who is living off a disability, you probably freaking hate that person, and for a number of reasons. On the one hand, maybe it's because that's a temptation, right? That is a death trap. By the way, if you go on disability, you're more likely to die young. I think that soon you just sort of
statistically, you're more likely to die than return to work.
Right. So it's a death trap, but it's also an easy out. And you're being kind of shunted aside by society and neutralized when you end up on what ought to be a social safety net to help you get back up on your feet. You're now, in order to stay on disability, you have to get on drugs. I had a friend who went through major surgery, had an appendicitis that his appendix blew up inside of him. He nearly died from infections. He had also had a broken ankle, had trouble standing for long periods, and his job was one where he had to stand up all day. He was just a wreck physically, and he was on all sorts of opioids, and he applied for disability, but he did not get it because he decided to wean himself off of opioids because it was making him mentally ill and more sick overall to be on them. So he actually kicked the habit. And because he was no longer on opioids, he was no longer eligible for disability. So because he lived, he didn't get that assistance. And so that tells you everything you need to know. That's why people hate these people.
Yeah, and Lisa McKenzie was talking about how like everyone's all on about like family breakdown, family breakdown, but in order to keep your to get benefits sufficient to like a livable level, a lot of families have to live apart so that you can say, look, I'm a single mother with kids, so they're still in a relationship, but the dad doesn't live at home purely because they can't survive any other way. So lots of this stuff happens for that reason. But I think, like as I said before, ideologically, it works because now you have someone to hate, right? That's great, right? You can get mad at that person instead of your boss, who by the way is giving you a job and giving you something that keeps you from that horrific life. So you can see how this works ideologically. But one of the comments said, "Oh, it's not hard to understand. We fear being destitute." I don't think that's the case. I think we like, as you said, we like our victims to be victims. A lot of the left has been taken over by a kind of middle class, charitable NGO kind of outlook, where it's become kind of left wing to advocate for charitable interventions for poor people. That's it. That's what the left has become. And what I was mentioning at the outset with this kind of like interest group democracy, that is what the left became since the 1990s, really, was that you had these interest groups. The left as a working class movement long died. Last nail in the coffin is the fall of the Soviet Union. That's over. Tony Blair says, the class war is over. This is late 90s. And that's it. That's just it. So what do you have? You have these interest groups who advocate for small little issues affecting poor people. That's it. And we don't fear becoming poor. The poor person is the ideal subject that allows us to not be poor, right? Because now I can make a name for myself. I can make work for myself and go work in a charity, work in an NGO, work here so that I can administer to their problems. What we fear is not becoming one of the poor, but becoming one of that working class, becoming the working class. And this is in the Communist Manifesto, right? The petty bourgeois fears being thrown down in the working class. That's why they hate them, because they fear and recognize that they're going to get tossed down into it. Often I have this like mental picture when I think about all the backbiting that goes on and the social media canceling and so on. I picture like just this mountain of bodies and just us scrambling up, boots on faces and just like grabbing people by the eyeballs. I'm just going to get to the fucking top of this, because you don't want to be left behind in that heap, right? It's not that you don't want to be poor, it's that you don't want to be like the people who have to work these like manual labor jobs. You don't want to become that kind of working class kind of outback person that you imagine exists. Like that, as I mentioned before, the image in the mind of the Tory of this like frothing racist. You see that's what's going to happen to you. But you went to university and you deserve better. And the fear is that you will not be given your birthright. That's what I think is the fear there. And that's why I think a lot of what the left has become feels more of an affinity with the poor person in a kind of paternalistic relationship than they do the worker.
Yeah, that may be right. And I think that, but just to give people a break, not that necessarily the leftists who rejected the song, but to give Oliver Anthony a break here. The other reason why you want to target the 300-pound 5'3" individual who's living on welfare is because that figure is kind of like the figure of Jaws in the movie Jaws. It's like an easy cipher for all of our different complex spheres to attach to. Zizek talks about this when he has an analysis of Jaws. I just watched the movie Jaws again the other day and thoroughly enjoyed its 1975 charms. And Robert Shaw was a hero to me in the movie. But I think it's easy to find, like you said, like some identifiable figure who we can project our fears upon, or who is a substitute figure for more complex problems, and that makes the solution simple. You just blow up the shark. You don't have to solve the conditions that created the problem with the shark in the first place. Like in the movie Jaws, they don't have to change the political economy of Amity. They just have to go out and kill the shark. So, and that's their solution in that movie. And so the solution that makes a hit movie. You make a movie about changing the political economy of Amity that doesn't include going out and killing the shark. It's not going to be a hit picture, and this wouldn't be a hit song if he sung about what was needed to be done, what needed to be done in order to overcome these conditions directly in a way that was as complex as it needed to be. But in any case, back to critiquing the left. Look, the left response is the Democratic Party's response. Okay. And so the question is, why does the Democratic Party not want this song to be accepted by Democrats as representing working class interests? And the reason why is because it includes a critique of the labor bureaucracy and the state bureaucracy itself. And that critique is right wing. It can only be expressed in right wing terms. There is no left critique of it left. So we need to develop a left critique of it. We need to develop an understanding that might include our own version of Jaws, but it wouldn't be some welfare recipient somewhere, so that people can conceive of an emancipatory critique of the welfare state rather than one which just pushes you back into the other side of capitalist politics, which is the politics of defending capital rather as against the state.
So what would that look like?
I think it would look like to Scream, but to start with, I don't know. What do you? Yeah, it would look like we'd have to have some sort of working class political party. Like we can't. The other thing I wrote down here is that we should talk about SORAB a bit in the Republican side of the struggle for working class people, and maybe in the Parrot Room, but. What would it look like? It would look like a development of socialist politics as opposed to labor politics. Like labor politics treats working class people. Chris Catrone says this, and I totally agree with him. Labor politics treats working class people as a subset of a voting bloc that have their own particular interest as workers. And socialist politics treats working class people as the political force for massive society-wide change that goes beyond their self-interest within the capitalist society, that takes the most universal aspects of their self-interest and tries to develop a politics based on that will then move beyond capitalism. And that's what we need as a socialist politics. And when I say that, it sounds like I should be saying we need anti-gravity devices or something, but it's not that utopian. It really isn't.
Well, there's the thing is that the language of socialism is so raw, is so heavy with years and years of what I was describing, this end of history kind of transformation into all these single issues and this sort of charitable cause, so that there is a recognizable language that when you hear it and when you see the person saying it, you just shut off. You're like, you are not for me, fuck right off. Right away, you're like, you don't talk down to me, And when somebody says it slightly differently, like in this song, that same kind of message that was always there in socialism all of a sudden sounds so new and refreshing. And the populists do this too, right? They seem to speak to the power of the working class, right? Mm-hmm. Make America great again. Who makes America? Who makes America great? The workers did, right? It's like this promise to center the workers. Now, do they do so in practice? No, it's just rhetorical. But you see that there's that desire, but you can't create a socialist left that's capable of taking hold of that desire, because we're under the weight and can't seem to get ourselves out from underneath decades and decades of destruction. And, even during Marx and Engels' time, they talked about this, about how utopian socialism, that they had to work for decades to shake utopian socialism out of the workers' heads, because that's what they associated with socialism with. And they were like, no, we've done so much work to kind of overcome this. There's a ton of work that needs to be done. I don't know even if we can overcome it, because that's what people hear when they hear socialism. They think of identity politics. They think of someone screaming at them for being too racist, or they think of a kind of charitable, paternalistic, welfarist outlook.
So Dr. Foreman asks if we've been in the Deep South, and by that I assume he
I
means
have actually, yes.
the southern part of the United States. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and I have relatives who lived in Alabama, my cousins in North Carolina and Virginia. I have, I am a Southerner. Okay, I have to confess. Ultimately, those are my origins.
And this is why Doug was able to dig out from Portlandia. Yes, he did have chickens in his backyard, and yet there was something stirring within him that said, chickens are not the end of history. I want to be empowered. I have something inside of me that begs for more. No, I have also been to the southern United States. My very good friend, well, I suppose we don't talk anymore because this is what my life is now. I go around so much all around the world and I lose touch with everybody. But who had been my best friend for many, many years was actually adopted. She was the child of a teen mother in Georgia. She was born in Georgia. And we went down there to meet her mother. And she had, it was very interesting. She had some issues with drug addiction and so on, and had managed to kind of climb out of that. Anyways, so yes, I spent some time down there.
Yeah. Yep.
And I also find, like, I don't know, a lot of what I'm talking about is speaking from experience. I find that Indigenous people, there's this divide is so powerful. You have like working class Indigenous people who, want a better future, want self-determination, really, like, who believe in their own freedom, bodily autonomy, all of this. Those are the ones that were at the trucker protests. Not going to go on and on about that forever, I promise. And then there are the people who have like if you have any inkling of a desire to get into that middle class, you adopt this whole language and you become this romantic anti-capitalism, heavy romanticism, leaning into noble savage kind of stereotypes, and like taking on this sort of bureaucratic role with your whole self, your whole heart. There's that whole side too. And when I wrote an article for Unheard during the trucker protests. I knew that some of my family members were there. And so I did a ton of interviews, and I interviewed a lot of people on reserve. And they kept saying, don't say where I'm from. Don't say my reserve name. But it was this huge divide that you could not say anything. You couldn't say anything against this sort of bureaucratic minded people because they will fuck you up. And like that's really it, right? It's like this, like the people who identify, a lot of people who identify as left wing have this kind of aspirational kind of middle class ethos, and it's an idea that appears right on, and it assists them in their upward climb. And then there is that working class that wants more and doesn't want to be an object anymore.
You know what? As we're heading towards the end of the stream, something occurred to me, which is that I have yet to pay the piper here. We have an ad to run for the School of Materialist Research that I'm going to run right now, and then we'll talk a little bit
Which
more.
Is a really brilliant initiative, by the way. Like, as the humanities are dying in universities, like this, I think this sort of thing is the future. Anyway,
I agree. Here we go. The School of Materialist Research is a self-sustainable platform where ideas are discussed in ways that would not be possible in conventional academia. The school is defined by its interest in the materialist approach to knowledge. Among its faculty are Julia Kristeva, Amanda Beach, Ben Woodward, Thomas Nail, and Paul Cockshott. The deadline for applications is September 4th, 2023. Check out the link to the School of Materialist Research in the description for this video. Right, so I have yet to put that link in the description. I will, along with the link to the second half of this conversation, which I'm going to say we need to start a little bit later today because I have, while we were in New York, my 71-year-old roommate got a total knee replacement.
Oh my.
Yeah, so I have to go and get him up and get him breakfast. I'm his butler now. and so I'm going to do that. He's got to get to a physical therapy appointment. So let's start this second half at 10:40.
Okay.
And then, so we'll see everyone over there. But is there any closing words or anything more you want to say about the School of Materialist Research?
Oh, go visit the link. It's brilliant. Like I really like Paul Cockshott. Like when I think about people who are really trying to think through moving beyond our impasse, Cockshott's there at the forefront of my mind. I think he's really good.
Yep. So yeah, we will. Yeah, I do. I think you could do a lot worse and couldn't do better maybe than going to sign up for the School of Materialist Research, because these people are brilliant. They'll give you a lot to think about and to understand. So on that note, I'm going to play the.
And obviously join us on Patreon, because also you get a weekly lecture, not for much longer, limited time only, a weekly lecture from you truly, and you get access to our back catalog of all the lectures. People pay £9,000 a year for this stuff, and you're getting it for £5, not for much longer. So sign up for our Patreon.
Yeah, and at the outset you told me, like, anything we need to plug or pitch, like products we want to sell, say that at the beginning. Of course,
Doug, you're saying the quiet part out loud.
But I want to say there's one thing everyone should buy, which is that the Death of the Millennial Left. It's still for sale. It's a great book. I've been reading it aloud because we're producing the audiobook right now, so that will be out shortly. And rereading it out loud, I guess I'm hypnotizing myself into to more and more being control-pilled. But it's a brilliant book. People should read it on the left. And with that, I'm going to run the old Sublation magazine intro. Here we go.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living